Hey guys, tonight we're slipping barefoot down a dew-damp riverbank at dawn, the Nile's mist curling around your ankles like a curious cat. You breathe in the scent of papyrus and mud, and your ears catch the soft rustle of linen as Egyptian physicians unroll woven mats beside the water's edge. You probably won't survive this shift without at least one startled croak from a frog, or realizing you forgot to duck when that ibis took flight. But hey, that's half the fun. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to post your location and what time it is where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand there, second in line after a sleepy crocodile farmer. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen joke, watching as the first golden light strikes the water. Physicians gather their clay jars of unguent's boots, barely making a sound on the packed silt. Their silhouettes stretch long and gentle across the riverbank, an everyday ritual in a world that's been coaxed from the fertile banks of the Nile for millennia. In fact, Egypt's medical practitioners recorded sophisticated treatments in the Edwin Smith Papyrus around 1600 BCE. Although scholars trace some remedies back as far as 2600 BCE, proof that ambition to heal has always run deep here. You notice how the lead healer's fingers graze the surface of a shallow basin carved from limestone. He hums softly, as if greeting an old friend, before dipping his palm into a viscous pool of golden liquid. Historians still argue whether this ritual began as a spiritual invocation or a practical effort to warm the mixture. Either way, it sets the mood for what follows. You step closer, catching a whiff of sticky sweetness, honey, of course, but not the cloying supermarket kind. This is wild desert honey, harvested by barefoot gatherers who whispered to the bees, according to a quirky folk tale that might be more legend than fact. Nearby, an apprentice dumps handfuls of ground herbs into a second basin, marshmallow root, juniper berries, even a pinch of crushed onion, because ancient Egyptians didn't mind a bit of tear-jerking aromatherapy. He stirs with a wooden spatula carved from acacia, its handle worn smooth by generations of use. The mix bubbles and glows under the falcon-headed morning sun, promising relief for the unlucky souls who lie just beyond a reed curtain. You peer through that curtain. A noble woman reclines on a low wooden bed, her linen gown bunched around one thigh. The healer applies a poultice along the curve of her hip, his fingertips gentle, yet determined. You sense her wince, though she doesn't cry out. Grace under pressure has always been an Egyptian virtue. Pressure ulcers, or as the locals call them, dragon's bite, were common among those who spent long days or nights laid up, whether from injury, childbirth, or the after effects of building a pyramid. It's a reminder that even in a civilization that erected wonders of stone, The human body could betray you at any moment. A soft splash distracts you. In the shallow water beyond, a fisherman hauls in his morning catch, a silent cameo in this healing play. You imagine the conversation if he dared interrupt. "Ah, you've come for a remedy, not dinner." That's your second joke of the section, perfectly timed for a sleepy grin. Meanwhile, the lead physician applies the honey mixture, covering it with a linen strip soaked in wine vinegar, part practical seal, part antiseptic dash. As the healer presses the cloth in place, he murmurs an incantation in the old tongue. Was it prayer to Sekhmet, goddess of healing and pestilence? Historians still argue whether such words were purely ritual, or if they actually masked coded medical instructions. You lean in, straining to catch each syllable, but all you hear is the gentle slap of linen and the distant caw of a heron. By now the sun has climbed higher. The riverbank frescoes, if only you were inside a tomb to see them, would glow in ochre and turquoise, celebrating life and death as two sides of a papyrus scroll. Here on the sand, there's no fresco, only the daily story of human bodies refusing to stay wound free. Yet the doctors work in unison. One massages the patient's ankle to restore circulation. Another scrapes away crusted debris with a flint-sharpened bronze blade, and a third prepares a fresh batch of poultice. This synchronized choreography feels almost dance-like. If your hips weren't throbbing, you might even tap your foot. You recall that odd snippet from a temple library. Some healers once used live maggots to clean devitalized tissue. It sounds icky, but those little insects in the right context were ancient Egypt's very first debridement tool. Funny how modern medicine had to reinvent that wheel thousands of years later. That's your third light joke next time you see maggots. Just think biomedical consultants. But jokes aside, the dawn ritual carries a sobering undercurrent. In a land where the afterlife reigned supreme, a body in pain was a curse no one relished. The physicians treat bedsores with grit and grace, guided by both practical knowledge and spiritual belief. They record observations on papyrus scrolls by torchlight, noting which poultice worked best, which linen weave held, and which incantation soothed the patient's spirit. You step back, letting the morning tableau settle in your mind like a tranquil painting. The honey glistens under the sun, a promise of relief and perhaps a little lingering stickiness on your fingertips if you dared taste it. You wouldn't, of course. This is a medical drama, not a snack break. Still, that temptation reminds you that even in the grandest of civilizations, the simplest of substances could wield the greatest healing power. You slip away from the riverbank scene, fingertips still sticky with golden residue, and follow the lead physician into a shaded courtyard where rows of stone basins catch dappled sunlight. Here, honey's sticky secret takes center stage. You probably won't survive long in this courtyard without accidentally dipping your finger into an ancient prop for a snack. But resist. That's not why we're here. Instead, you're about to learn why honey earned its reputation as ancient Egypt's miracle elixir, far beyond its role in sweetening figs. The courtyard hums with life. Sandaled feet shuffle on flagstones, and the sour tang of fermented date wine drifts through the air. In one corner, an apprentice leans into a ceramic jar, inhaling deeply, before offering a theatrical "ah," as though discovering the world's finest perfume. That's your first light joke. If perfume were made of fermented sugars, the jar holds honey gathered from wild bees, nesting in desert cliffs, prized for its purity and antibacterial prowess. Ancient texts like the Ebers Papyrus, compiled around 1550 BCE, list honey in over 50 recipes, spanning wound dressings to cough syrups. In fact, honey's high sugar concentration creates an environment hostile to microbes by drawing water out of bacterial cells through osmosis, a principle modern scientists confirmed just last century. Historians still argue whether Egyptian scribes fully understood this osmotic magic or simply revered honey as divine nectar. The debate drips sweeter than the substance itself. You wander between workstations where honey glimmers in bowls of various sizes. Some is pale and runny, harvested from flowering acacias. Others are dark and dense, gathered near tamarisk trees. A scholar in a flax tunic examines each sample, humming, as though selecting a fine wine. He jots notes on a wax tablet, comparing viscosities and floral sources, because Egyptians recognized that all honey wasn't created equal, another quirky tidbit that modern honey aficionados might envy. Your host dips a thin reed into a shallow dish brimming with thick amber liquid. He touches it to the tip of his tongue and nods solemnly, like a sommelier sniffing oak barrels. This batch is from the Wadi Natron region, he declares. Its antimicrobial potency rivals our temple-grade unguent. You bite back the urge to ask if temple-grade honey comes with its own incense. There's your second light joke, temple honey, and its heavenly aroma. Nearby, someone cracks a powdered resin into a mortar and pestle. They grind pine resin, myrrh, and beeswax into a paste, then fold in honey until the mixture ripples like molten gold. This hybrid ungual concoction adheres to flesh-sealing wounds against dirt and flies. Egyptians even mixed honey with bitumen for waterproof bandages used on naval injuries, proof that necessity, once again, fostered ingenious solutions. You settle on a stone bench, under a vine-shaded trellis, tracing a carved lotus motif with your finger. The lotus was more than decoration. It symbolized rebirth, a promise that wounds could heal and life could renew. The symbolism wasn't lost on physicians who saw each dressing not just as a practical barrier, but as a ritual act, invoking renewal. Through an arched doorway, you glimpse a small sanctum dedicated to Sekhmet, goddess of healing and plague. A pair of priests stands before a basalt statue, chanting softly. One holds a honey pot, the other a brush of papyrus fibers. They anoint the statue's paws and amble around its base, offering honey as a libation to ensure patient recovery. Historians still argue Whether these rituals aimed to appease the goddess or simply reinforced communal faith in the medicine, you lean toward the latter, a bit of divine theater to bolster morale. Returning to the courtyard, you explore a low table laden with honey-based balms. One jar's label inked on papyrus reads, "Sun-fired healing," denoting honey warmed gently in sunlit vessels before mixing with ground frankincense. Warming reduced moisture, boosting the honey's longevity. It also made the mixture more pliable on application. A teacher nearby demonstrates the technique. She dips her fingers into the warm honey, then traces gentle spirals on a loaf of freshly baked bread, illustrating how these balms spread evenly over skin. You resist the urge to sample the bread, reminding yourself this is medical demonstration, not afternoon tea. Suddenly, a drop of honey falls on your sandal. You cock your head and flick it off, quipping under your breath. Sticky, like a mummy's curse. Third joke of the section, and you're on a roll. Ancient Egyptians honored bees for their industriousness, associating them with attributes of community and order. In fact, some glyphs show bees adorning the crowns of pharaohs, mainstream historical fact that underscores honey's royal prestige. You glance at the setting sun, reflected on polished limestone, and the courtyard's shadows grow long. It's remarkable how this one-ingredient honey reshaped medical practice. Modern doctors sometimes use medical-grade honey to treat chronic wounds and burns, rediscovered only in the late 20th century. Yet here, 28 centuries earlier, Egyptians harnessed honey's power with intuitive brilliance. As you rise to rejoin the physicians by the Nile, you brush residual honey from your fingertips, mindful of the ritual's tactile richness. The courtyard fades behind you, but the memory of that sweet antiseptic aroma lingers. You carry with you not just a lesson in chemistry, but an appreciation for a culture that saw healing as a blend of science, symbolism, and sticky sweetness. You slip back into the warm morning air of a typical Nileside household, where the scent of freshly baked flatbread mingles with clay smoke from cooking fires. Here, bedsores unmasked reveal themselves not in royal courts, but on simple reed-woven beds of farmers, fishermen, and artisans. You probably won't survive long perched on these fragile mattresses without at least one surprise poke from a stiff reed. But that's part of the immersive experience. You inhale the earthy aroma of mud brick walls and straw mats as you watch an elderly potter shift uncomfortably, wincing when his hip presses too long against the rough surface, an unwelcome demonstration of pressure ulcers at work. Pressure ulcers, or dragon's bite, as locals sometimes grimly joke, were far from rare. Historians note that Egyptian physicians observed these wounds in any patient confined to bed for days after injury or illness, mainstream fact recorded in the Kahun Gynecological Papyrus around 1825 BCE. That makes bedsores one of the oldest documented medical conditions in human history. Historians still argue whether the ancients truly understood the underlying mechanics of tissue ischemia or simply described what they saw. But the reality on clay floors was unavoidable. You crouch beside the potter's bed to examine a reddened patch on his shoulder blade, the skin puckered like a neglected piece of dough. A thin scab glistens at the center like a miniature crater. You catch a whiff of something sour, stagnant, sweat, mingling with the faint tang of dried river silt. That's your first light joke. Bedsores, the original mud mask facial. Despite the comedic spin, the scene is sobering. These wounds could fester and worsen, even proving fatal if left unchecked. Next to you, an apprentice sets out a wooden tray of poultice ingredients. There's honey again, of course, but also ground sesame seeds for gentle abrasion, lotus pollen for its purported cooling properties, and a small heap of powdered hippo teeth. Yes, hippo teeth. According to a fringed tale passed down by river traders, crushed hippo tooth powder provided extra absorbency. But scholars debate whether that wisdom originated from actual observation or the goat-headed laughter of tipsy travelers. You stifle a grin. The idea of hippo teeth in a wound dressing feels like medical cosplay gone wild. As you lean in closer, you notice the potter's wife smoothing a fine linen strip over the sore, patting it softly to secure the poultice. Linen grown along this very river offered breathability and strength. Ancient Egyptians valued it so highly they used it as currency, at times mainstream fact that underlines how vital textiles were to daily life. Yet here, that same linen binds wounds, a humble reminder that survival often hinged on the simplest resources. A coarse-whiskered elder in a faded tunic steps into the courtyard, carrying a shallow bowl of filtered Nile water. He begins to lightly rinse the perimeter of the ulcer, murmuring a prayer to Thoth, god of wisdom. Historians still argue whether this invocation was meant to cleanse the wound spiritually or simply to calm the patient's nerves. Perhaps a bit of both. You catch your second light joke slipping out. When in doubt, call in Thoth, chief scribe and part-time wound washer. The rinsing reveals tender, pink flesh, glistening where dead tissue once clung. You hear the apprentice whisper that some physicians preferred to scrape away tissue with sharpened bronze spatulas, while others recommended leaving it alone to detach naturally, a debate echoing through millennia. You squint at the potter's discomfort and think of modern debridement. Funny how we've circled back to age-old questions about intervention versus patience. The potter exhales in a rasping breath. He's been barley loading sacks for 10 days after a twisted ankle left him bedridden. Imagine the irony. The very river he worships for fertility also subjects him to lasting pain. His wife teases him gently, saying he's earned a vacation from heavy lifting, a quip that earns your third joke for the section, and maybe a rueful smile from the potter himself. Nearby, a small child grabs a bit of lotus pollen from the tray and rubs it across the back of his hand, giggling when it tickles. That simple act reminds you that life goes on around these wounds. Children chase frogs, dogs bark at passing waterfowl, and older siblings pound clay into rough shapes for next season's pottery. Bedsores may slow one man's hands, but they cannot halt the river's flow of daily ritual. You notice a tiny scar at the ulcer's edge, evidence of a previous dressing applied weeks before. That scar tissue, though weak signals, progress an early sign of healing. The potter's wife replaces the linen strip, tucking edges neatly before securing a length of papyrus cord around his shoulder to keep him from rolling. Ingenious, maybe. Fringe, or fact. Some scholars still argue whether papyrus cord was preferred over leather ties because it avoided chafing, or simply because leather was too costly. You lean in and whisper to yourself, papyrus cord fashion statement or functional necessity. The courtyard shrinks in the golden noonlight as the sun climbs high. Sweat beads on the potter's forehead, shimmering like handfuls of honey you glimpsed earlier. The air is thick with moisture, reminding you that in humid climates, bedsores could worsen rapidly. Egyptian homes used open courtyards for ventilation, a natural form of climate control that doubled as open-air clinic. That architectural choice meant that even in the hottest months, patients could receive tender care under dappled shade. As the physician consults a small ink-stained papyrus scroll, he mutters measurements and times, reapply every third watch unless signs of infection appear. You lean closer, catching the faint clack of pottery shards in a nearby workshop. It's a vivid counterpart to the clinical instructions. Humble surroundings. Meticulous care. This interplay defined much of ancient Egyptian domestic medicine. You step back, brushing dust from your knees. The potter's eyes meet yours. He nods in silent thanks. You offer a respectful bow, second-person present narrative, notwithstanding, and wander toward the sunlit threshold. The lesson lingers. Bedsores unmasked weren't exclusive to palaces. They were humble afflictions in every Nile-stained home, addressed with the same ingenuity, ritual, and stubborn optimism that built pyramids. You slip through a shaded arcade of columns into the inner sanctum of the royal palace where Pharaoh's personal healers await their next prestigious case. You probably won't survive long playing court physician without mistaking that golden throne for a dental chair, but careful, this is no ordinary clinic. The air here is thick with incense smoke and hushed whispers, the very aroma of power. You approach a polished alabaster basin, its surface cool beneath your palm, and you're immediately aware that healing in this realm carries an aura as heavy as the monarch's jeweled collar. The lead royal physician steps forward, draped in a linen cloak, embroidered with lapis lazuli dots, mainstream fact reflecting Egypt's obsession with precious stones. He bows gently to you, then turns to tend a young scribe who reclines on opulent cushions. The scribe's hip bears the telltale marks of a bedsore, small but crimson, You resist the urge to check the cushions for goose feathers. Luxury can't soften every ache. Instead, you ready yourself to observe a bedside method refined for royalty. The physician selects a narrow bronze spatula with an ivory handle carved in the form of a lotus bud. It gleams under torchlight, as if daring you to admire it. He murmurs a short incantation. Historians still argue whether these words were a mnemonic for dosage or a plea to Sekhmet, and then deftly lifts the linen gauze covering the wound. The scribe winces, but doesn't speak. In royal courts, silence was sometimes valued above comfort. You notice their specialized approach before applying any poultice. The physician massages the surrounding flesh with a paste of crushed ants and natron. That's right, ants chosen for their formic acid, a crude antiseptic. Fringe, tidbit, or fact. Scholars debate whether ant paste actually reduced infection or simply irritated the skin to spur blood flow. You twitch at the thought of powdery ant legs on delicate flesh, your first light joke of the section, but the sphinx-faced doctor's expression remains impassive. Next, he pours a measure of honey into a silver chalice, swirling in powdered myrrh and frankincense resin. He warms the mixture slightly over a brazier, chanting softly. The heat loosens the resin, creating a smooth, aromatic balm. You catch a wisp of smoke and wriggle your nose. Incense and medicinal fumes blend into a heady perfume that might make a commoner swoon. There's your second joke. Just a whiff of this, and you'll forget all your problems, including the throne's tax burden. A pair of apprentices stand by with fine strips of bleached linen cut from imported flax. Royal dressers harvested this flax along the Nile Delta's wetlands, then bleached and woven it by hand. Mainstream fact, underscoring the empire's textile prowess. The cloth feels like a whisper against your fingertips, a stark contrast to the coarse linens outside the palace. Here, every detail whispers luxury. You lean toward the scribe, noting his steady breathing. The physician dips a reed brush into the warm honey resin, then paints a delicate layer over the ulcer. He presses a linen strip onto the balm, smoothing edges with the gentlest fingertip. It's an act of reverence, almost ritualized. He then wraps the whole with a band of silk ribbon in royal blue, sealing the dressing with a wax seal bearing the king's cartouche. Healing for Pharaoh's court comes with paperwork. An ivory tray appears, bearing small vials of scented oils, cinnamon bay laurel, and another mysterious yellow fluid drawn from the gum of a desert shrub. The physician drips a few drops around the wound's perimeter, saying that oils help maintain skin elasticity. Historians still argue whether these oils provided genuine therapeutic benefits or simply masked odors in crowded palace quarters. You internally quip third joke in check. Nothing says royal treatment like aromatherapy for your sore butt. Beyond the curtained alcove, you glimpse a line of silent eunuchs bearing ornate fans, poised to waft cool air toward the patient. This wasn't mere theatrics. airflow discouraged bacterial growth in humid climates. In fact, palace architects designed ventilation shafts strategically to channel breezes, mainstream fact, showing Egyptian innovation in indoor climate control. You raise an eyebrow, imagining staff chasing flies with feathered fans while chanting, "Shoo, unwelcome guests." A court scribe steps forward with a fresh papyrus scroll and stylus. The royal healer dictates precise details, ulcer size, poultice composition, and the hour's schedule for reapplication. Behind those columns, dozens of such charts meticulously recorded patient progress, an early precursor to patient files. Botanical sketches line the margin, capturing the exact shape of lotus petals and acacia leaves used in each remedy. The scribe exhales a sign, the ordeal is over. The physician steps back, offering a curt nod as apprentices carry away the linens. You feel the weight of tradition pressing upon you. This is medicine woven with ceremony. The combination of mystical incantations, luxurious materials, and precise record-keeping made royal care both art and science. You pivot to leave, catching a final glimpse of the pharaoh's golden throne glinting in a distant hall. This world of opulence offered specialized methods for the elite, but bedsores themselves remained a great equalizer. Whether on king or peasant flesh, demanded the same basic respect. You carry that thought as you slip back into the sunlit corridors. You emerge from the palace's hush into the bright bustle of a temple courtyard, where rows of stone plinths display jars of curious mixtures, ingredients beyond honey that ancient physicians combined to battle bedsores. You probably won't survive long in this sensory overload without accidentally sniffing enough exotic resin to trigger a sneeze. But eyes forward, it's time to explore the rest of the medical pantry. Stone vessels, etched with hieroglyphs, hold scents and substances gathered from as far away as Punt Nubia and the Sinai. You hover beside a low table where an elderly herb gatherer arranges a lineup of powders. The pale grains of crushed lotus root, the silvery dust of powdered snail shells, and a heap of salt-cured carob seeds. Historians still argue whether snail shell powder provided genuine structural support to dressings or was simply added to impress wealthy patrons, but the scribe saw merit in every sprinkle. A young apprentice lifts a small amphora of ground juniper berries. He pricks the cork lid and inhales deeply, wrinkling his nose at the piney aroma. Juniper prized for its astringent properties, tightened skin around wounds, helping prevent fluid buildup. According to a fringe account preserved in the Berlin papyrus, juniper-infused poultices once halted a palace-wide outbreak of ulcer infections, though some scholars debate the outbreak scale and whether juniper played any real part in its containment. Your fingers brush against a bowl of sticky pitch, a tar-like resin obtained from date palms. Contrary to the sweet honey you've grown accustomed to, pitch is dark, viscous, and aromatic in a smoky, almost acrid way. Apprentices mix it sparingly with honey to create a waterproof seal over dressings, especially valuable during flood season when rising Nile waters threaten to wash away everything in their path. It's a gritty addition, but ingenious, an early example of water-resistant technology. Next, you spot a ceramic jar, labeled in faded ink, ground cobalt alabaster. The gleaming white powder looks pristine until you realize it hurts to inhale. Ancient texts describe using certain mineral powders to dry out wounds, though historians still argue whether these minerals truly aided healing or merely operated as rudimentary desiccants that worsened pain. You stifle a wince and remember your first joke of the section. Don't sniff the alabaster unless you're auditioning for a mummy's makeover. Close by, a leather satchel spills its contents onto a wooden tray, hand-chopped aloe leaf pulp. The gelatinous green chunks glisten under sunlight. Aloe imported from desert oases provided cooling relief when mixed with honey, an ancient equivalent of modern burn gel. An elderly potter's daughter once rubbed aloe poultice on a scald caused by overheated water jars. Locals still argue whether her rapid recovery owed more to aloe or to sheer luck, but the gel remains a staple in every medical kit. A striking contrast stands in a porcelain bowl, bright saffron threads prized for their pigment and mild antiseptic qualities. A priestess reaches in and weaves the threads into a fine mesh before placing them atop a honey base. Saffron's vibrant color signaled potency, and its luxury status underscored the patient's importance. Was this approach practical or purely cosmetic? Scholars still argue if saffron's expense made it more symbolic than therapeutic. Another reminder that medicine often doubles as theater. Across the courtyard, an alabaster jar holds ground blue Egyptian frit, the precursor to the famous Egyptian blue pigment. Although primarily used in art, this mineral powder also featured in some poultices as a mild antimicrobial agent. Fringe sources suggest that high-status patients demanded blue dressings so they'd match their jewelry, yet mainstream records focus on its antiseptic claims. You mug for your own imaginary audience. Blue bandages, the original fashion statement. There's your second joke. Nearby, a row of bronze bowls contains aromatic oils, cedar pine and sycamore. These oils, when mixed into honey-based salves, added pleasant fragrance and enhanced antiseptic action. Widely traded along Mediterranean routes, these oils connected Egypt's medical practices to far-flung lands. You note the irony. While Egyptians revered the Nile's bounty, they also recognized the healing worth of foreign flora, a testament to early globalization in medicine. Your attention shifts to a squat clay pot filled with powdered camphor crystals, exuding a cooling menthol scent. Camphor, imported via caravan from Himalayan sources, acted as a mild analgesic, numbing pain and reducing itch. Ancient travelers swore by its use in wound care, though historians still argue whether the camphor they used was chemically identical to modern standards or a diluted substitute. Either way, the menthol rush must have felt like relief incarnate. A young scribe dips a reed brush into a shallow dish of wine vinegar, a surprising yet common ingredient. The acidity cleansed wounds and prevented spoilage of dressings, doubling as both antiseptic and preservative. You inhale the sharp tang and quip third joke wine vinegar because sometimes you need gastronomy in your medicine. As you wander, you note the seamless blending of natural and exotic ingredients. Barley flour, thickened poultices, pounded insect shells, added grit for gentle debridement. Willow bark provided salicylates for pain relief. Each component, mainstream or fringe, formed layers of experimentation and tradition. Historians still argue whether these blends originated in formal medical schools or emerged from trial and error among working healers. You step back, surveying the rich tapestry of materials. In modern wound care, we rely on synthesized antibiotics, engineered dressings, and sterile gauze. Yet here, 2 millennia before germ theory, Egyptians crafted complex recipes using ingredients carried on boats, donkeys, and camels, an astonishing testament to human ingenuity. You pocket a few grains of lotus pollen, just enough to tickle your nose later, and take one last sniff of the aromatic courtyard before heading toward the next chapter of healing. The ingredients beyond honey won't just stick with the patient. They'll linger in your memory like the faint scent of incense at dawn. You slip into a dimly lit alcove lined with alcove shelves, each shelf hosting the tools of the trade, rudimentary instruments that Egyptian physicians wielded like extensions of their own hands. You probably won't survive long poking around here without nicking a bronze probe on your sandal. But keep your wits, these implements defined millennia of medical practice. A low wooden tray displays sharpened bronze scalpels, their edges gleaming faintly under torchlight. You pick one up, noting its weight lighter than a modern scalpel, yet surprisingly sturdy. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, corroded quickly in humid climates, which meant healers replaced blades, often mainstream fact that underscores the Egyptians' commitment to cleanliness. Historians still argue whether frequent blade turnover was driven by hygiene or by the metal's scarcity. Either way, surgeons valued a keen edge above all. Beside the scalpels lie bronze probes and spatulas of various sizes. One spatula tapers to a fine flattened tip, ideal for gently teasing away dried poultice without gouging flesh. Another ends in a rounded scoop, used for applying soft mixtures into ulcers. You flex your fingers around the spatula's smooth handle and imagine marshaling these tools in a delicate ballet of healing. You notice a small pile of flint-sharpened chisels, primitive but effective for tasks requiring precise scraping. Flint held its edge brilliantly, though it chipped more readily than bronze. Apprentices ground these chisels against coarse sandstone every morning as part of their training, a ritual that took nearly an hour, giving students time to chant medical hymns. That's your first light joke? Nothing like a morning grind to sharpen your skills and your gossip. Next, you inspect a set of reed-made syringes, hollow reeds capped at one end with honey-waxed beeswax and fitted with piston-like rods. Oil of castor or water could be drawn in and gently forced into wounds to irrigate debris. Modern historians still argue whether reed syringes delivered consistent pressure or if they simply came in handy when irrigating more stubborn patients. Regardless, this ingenuity foreshadowed modern irrigation techniques. An ivory box opens to reveal papyrus fibers twisted into fine brushes. These brushes, feather-soft applied balms, delicately ensuring even coverage over tender skin. You run a brush across your palm. The filaments tickle like a kitten's whiskers, your second joke for the section. The Egyptians recognized that brush application reduced thick clumps, allowing medicinal pastes to penetrate folds and creases. A mortar and pestle set, crafted from smooth granite anchors, one corner of the tray. You heft the pestle in your hand and feel the cool weight of stone. Practitioners ground herbs, resins, and minerals here, sometimes for hours, until powders reached a fine uniform consistency. The rhythmic thud of grinding echoed through workshops, a background beat to the symphony of clinic life. Fringe anecdotes claim some healers ground materials in moonlight to capture lunar energy. Scholars still argue whether such rituals held any genuine medical merit or were simply poetic flair. Nearby, a slender bronze rod tipped with a ball of tightly wound linen awaits. These cautery wicks soaked in oil were lit to cauterize stubborn sores, sealing wounds and preventing hemorrhage. You approach too close and nearly catch a whiff of heated flax. Thankfully, you dodge the glowing ember. That's your third joke, cautery wicks, because sometimes your wound needs a fiery pep talk. A leather roll secured by papyrus cord holds an assortment of fine tweezers. These delicate pincers plucked stray hairs around ulcers, preventing ingrown follicles from complicating dressings. You pinch a stray thread from your tunic, marveling at the precision represented here. Tweezers signaled an attention to detail, rivaling modern dermatologists. Mainstream fact, showing how far ancient hands reached into microcare. Perched on a carved wooden block, you find a copper basin inscribed with the healer's cartouche. It bore water for instrument rinsing between patients, a simple yet crucial step to minimize cross-contamination. Some physicians added crushed natron to the rinse, an early form of antisepsis, though historians still argue whether natron's alkaline properties truly inhibited microbes or just dried instruments faster. A cluster of reed-tied bundles holds bundles of papyrus splints, thin flexible strips used to immobilize limbs and support bedsore-prone joints. You lift one and bend it gently, noting its springy tension. Immobilization prevented friction that worsened ulcers, blending structural support with comfort. That's a reminder that Even in rudimentary times, pressure redistribution mattered, a fact rarely credited outside modern physical therapy circles. Your gaze drifts to a small pile of dried, sharpened bones, often from cattle or poultry, used as improvised probes or spatulas in emergencies. Bone resisted corrosion and could be sharpened to a fine edge, though it broke more easily than metal. Fringe stories recount healers favoring bone in certain sacred cases, believing it carried the animal's vitality into the healing process. Scholars still debate whether this was symbolic or therapeutic. A reed fan rests against the tray for ward ventilation, echoing what you saw at the palace. Airflow reduced moisture, and chilling drafts prevented patients from catching colds. Fan bearers in wealthier households performed this task continuously, an aspect of royal care that filtered down into well-to-do clinics. You smirk, picturing interns fanning patients and chanting meditative mantras, a decidedly serene, if unusual, internship. As you finish surveying the implements, the head physician sweeps a jeweled enamel box onto the tray. Inside lies a tiny phial of kohl, finely ground galena, used to line eyelids. Though primarily cosmetic, kohl served medicinal roles. A paste of galena and oil could treat eye infections, and physicians sometimes used it in poultices around headbed sores. Mainstream fact confirms kohl's multifunctional place in Egyptian life. You gather the tools back on the tray, your mind racing with respect for the deliberate simplicity of each instrument. This toolkit, bronze, bone, reed, and stone, represented a bridge between hands, hearts, and healing. Despite lacking modern sterilization, ancient Egyptians wielded these tools with surprising precision and ritual, forging a legacy that echoes in today's operating theaters. You emerge from the tool-laden alcove and find yourself back on the sun-baked riverbank, where physicians once tested exotic mixtures against relentless desert heat. Today's lesson is crocodile dung sunscreen, a callback you definitely remember from our Nile-side antics. You probably won't survive the sun's glare here without at least one generous smear of pastes more foul than fortifying, but brace yourself. This sun-blocky oddity intersects with bedsore care in surprisingly pragmatic ways. The river glimmers, and a pale doctor scoops a small lump of dried crocodile dung from a clay jar, crushing it with a smooth stone. Yes, you heard right. Crocodile dung gathered from nocturnal river patrols. A fringe narrative suggests Egyptians first stumbled on its UV-blocking potential when a dune skimmer's cavalry horse refused to graze near freshly excreted deposits, its coat appearing oddly matte under the sun. Historians still argue whether these agrarian tales hold water or simply sprang from the fertile imaginations of desert storytellers. Near the water's edge, the physician adds ground crocodile dung to a blend of honey and natron, stirring until the concoction thickens into a dark paste. He pats the mixture onto his forearms, forming a thin, matte layer. You cringe picturing flecks of dung rubbing into pores, but notes in the Eber's papyrus indeed mention the black ointment that prevents sunburn and preserves skin. Mainstream fact confirms Egyptians employed dark pastes of ash and minerals for UV defense, though the specific dung ingredient remains contested. As you watch, an apprentice leans over to apply the same paste along the outer edge of a patient's bedsores. Surprised. This dual use makes sense when bedbound patients were carried out to sunlit courtyards for fresh air. Their vulnerable skin needed protection from harsh rays. Thus, a paste that doubled as sunscreen and moisture barrier offered a clever two-in-one remedy, a testament to Egyptian ingenuity. The lead healer dips a brush of stiff papyrus fibers into a separate bowl, then deftly sweeps it across the patient's exposed shoulders. He murmurs a soft invocation to Re-God of the Sun, perhaps seeking divine sanction for this pungent application. Historians still argue whether these invocations were religious formalities or mnemonic devices for the recipe's steps. Either way, they lent ceremony to a gruesome chore. A nearby scribe makes a hurried entry on a wax tablet. Apply black ointment at first light and reapply every third watch. The tablet also notes wary advice, not for wounded men, lest the paste sting. That warning hints at practical observation. Ash and dung could irritate open sores, underscoring that even the stickiest sunscreen demanded caution. You quietly sniff the air. The scent is earthy, pungent, and oddly reminiscent of damp reeds after a rainstorm. Your second joke surfaces unbidden. Nothing says spa day like dung-scented lotion. The patient flinches, but doesn't protest. This is survival before luxury. Even today, some natural sunscreens use mineral-rich clays for UV protection, modern science inadvertently echoing ancient risk-taking. Beyond this sunlit patch, puppeteer-like figures hold woven palm leaf parasols, ready to shield patients from direct light. In fact, an archaeological sketch from a temple tomb depicts attendants fanning a reclining figure under a perforated canopy, mainstream fact that echoes current shade-based sun protection strategies. That mosaic of parasols, paste, and prayer created a holistic defense against the sun for those recovering from bedsores. As the sun climbs, the healer scrapes excess paste into a shallow basin of Nile water, filtering out dung particles and collecting leftover mix for reuse. Resourcefulness reigned when materials were scarce. You can't help but quip your third joke, eco-friendly, recycling ancient Egyptian style. Standing in the heat, you feel the paste hardened slightly on your own forearm, an unintentional demonstration of its staying power. You dab a finger at your temple, hesitating before taste testing. You wouldn't really, but the thought underscores a broader truth. Ancient Egyptians approached challenges with trial error and a dash of daring experimentation. You step back, letting the river's breeze unstick you from the pungent memory. Crocodile dung sunscreen remains a curious footnote in medical lore, a symbol of resourceful risk-taking where bedsores and sunburn met at the crossroads of necessity. You slip through the grand entrance of a temple complex dedicated to Amun-Ra, its towering columns carved with scenes of offerings and divine ceremonies. Here, a priest's ulcer unfolds before you as a case study in both suffering and salvation. You probably won't survive long wandering these hallowed halls without stumbling into a ritual purification basin, but focus. This story charts a single patient's dramatic healing journey recorded on papyrus scrolls. The patient is priest Amenhotep, a middle-aged man whose duties require long hours of kneeling before altars and reclining in meditation. The weight of his devotion has taken a toll. His sacral area bears a deep bedsore, the skin puckered and blackened at its center. Physicians refer to it as the temple's shadow, a moniker drawn from the gloom cast by flickering oil lamps. Despite the palace's resources, Amenhotep's ulcer persisted for weeks, baffling both secular and divine healers. You step beside his low divan, noting the ornate cushions embroidered with lotus patterns. His legs lie extended, ankles crossed in serene acceptance. A physician examines the wound with a bronze probe, murmuring descriptions that you transcribe silently onto a wax tablet. He notes the ulcer's dimensions, 2 thumb widths across its depth, measured by a rudimentary reed measure. Mainstream fact: ancient Egyptian physicians routinely recorded such metrics in surgical manuals, though scholars still argue whether these measurements were standardized or varied by region. Nearby, an apprentice applies a gentle poultice of honey and crushed juniper berries, smoothing it into the ulcer like an artist. Amenhotep's face remains impassive, his eyes fixed on a distant wall painting of the Nile's fertile banks. Despite the pain, he maintains the outward calm expected of a temple dignitary. This is your first light joke, meditation level. Olympic achieving enlightenment, even when your butt's on fire. The consulting physician consults the papyrus record of Imhotep, Egypt's legendary healer, seeking guidance. The Imhotep scroll prescribes alternating warm and cool dressings, a technique thought to stimulate circulation without shocking the body. Historians still argue whether such thermal cycles offered real physiological benefits or merely comforted patients psychologically. You imagine Amenhotep's surprise when asked to endure both soothing warmth and icy Nile water rinses. Sounds like spa treatments gone rogue. That afternoon, a priestess of Sekhmet arrives bearing a sacred vessel of spring water from Gabel el-Silsila. She chants softly while sprinkling droplets around Amenhotep's head, cleansing his spirit before healing his flesh. The physicians allow the ceremony, believing that spiritual well-being could influence physical recovery. This blend of science and ritual resonates through every aspect of Egyptian medicine. You return the next morning to find the ulcer's edges less dark, the surrounding skin blushing with renewed life. The physician scratches a mark on the scroll and increments the day count. He mixes a new remedy, honey infused with lotus pollen, and a dash of pitch to keep the dressing in place. The paste glistens under torchlight, exuding a faint floral aroma that contrasts with the sour tang of the wound. As the poultice settles, Amenhotep breathes deeply, his chest rising in a rhythm of acceptance. The healer covers the poultice with layered linen and secures it with soft papyrus ties. This regimen continues for days, each cycle documented in meticulous detail. You peek at the scroll symbols, note patient's discomfort, slight improvements, and a rare setback when heavy rains flooded the temple courtyard, raising humidity and threatening to unstick the dressings. Historians still argue whether seasonal flooding often complicated wound care, or if temple architects designed drainage to avoid such issues. On day 7, you witness a breakthrough. The physician gently peels back the linen to reveal rosy, healthy tissue at the wound center, a sight that draws a quiet murmur from all present. Amenhotep's jaw relaxes for the first time, as if lifted by unseen hands. You feel your second light joke slipping out, from temple's shadow to sunlit scar in just a week. Talk about divine intervention. The lead physician delivers a small speech commending Amenhotep's patience and the efficacy of the treatments. He seals the last dressing with anointing oil of cedar and a whisper to Thoth for continued vigilance. The priest places a handful of sacred lotus petals on the wound, symbolic nourishment for both body and soul. Within 2 weeks, the ulcer closes completely. Scar tissue, pale and slightly raised, marks the site a permanent testament to the ordeal. Physicians note final observations on the scroll: ulcer healed without infection. Use massage and fresh linens to prevent recurrence. They gift Amenhotep a box of scented oils and instruct him to recline on a softer bed during his devotional practices. You stand and offer a respectful bow. The case study of the priest's ulcer illustrates the depth of ancient Egyptian medical care, a fusion of precise observation, practical remedy, and spiritual ceremony. Even in the realm of divine service, the human body demanded meticulous attention. As you depart the temple's quiet sanctum, the echo of chants mingles with distant Nile waters. The story of Amenhotep's healing journey lingers, a vivid testament to ingenuity and belief intertwined along the banks of the ancient river. You slip into a cool, torchlit chamber lined with papyrus scrolls, where medical texts debated take center stage. You probably won't survive long here without sneezing through dusty tomes, but brace yourself. This scholarly enclave holds the secrets and disputes that shaped Egyptian healing lore. Rows of high wooden shelves cradle rolled scrolls whose hieroglyphs shimmer under oil lamps. A veteran scribe gestures you closer, unrolling a fragment of the Ebers papyrus, its papyrus fibers crackling like ancient whispers. He reads aloud the recipe for a bedsore dressing. Take honey mix with crushed lotus pollen, add pitch, and apply thrice daily. Yet across the room, another scroll, an updated copy, recommends only honey and natron, omitting lotus entirely. Historians still argue whether these discrepancies reflect evolving practice or simple copying errors, a debate that echoes through generations. You perch on a low stool tracing the hieroglyphs with your finger. The script mentions dragon's bite, the poetic name for bedsores, and specifies measurements in handbreadths, an imprecise unit that leaves room for interpretation. Fringe scholars claim some practitioners adjusted recipes by ear, literally listening for a hissing sound when heating pitch, while mainstream evidence shows workshops use standardized fragrant markers to judge consistency. Either way, the uncertainty invites speculation. Did ancient physicians rely more on intuition than exact formulas? Nearby, a young apprentice holds a competing scroll from the Edwin Smith Papyrus, famed for its surgical case studies. It prescribes a different regimen: soak wound in beer, then cover with honey and powdered porpoise teeth, a quirky tidbit that makes you blink. Porpoise teeth. According to a fringe account, fishermen noticed porpoise skull fragments with a chalky interior that reminded healers of absorbent clay. Scholars debate whether this suggestion ever made it into actual practice or remained an experimental footnote. You lean forward as the scribe flips to a section discussing antiseptic incantations. One text pairs honey with an incantation to Sekhmet. Another pairs identical ingredients with a hymn to Isis. Historians still argue whether invoking different deities influenced outcomes or merely reflected regional temple affiliations. You quietly quip your first joke. Apparently, bedsores needed personalized playlist options. A marble-topped table supports several open scrolls, each annotated with red ink. Marginal notes question the efficacy of certain blends. Too much natron dries flesh to alchemy, warns one hand. Less lotus invites more discomfort, counters another. The back and forth resembles modern peer review, minus the formal journals and footnotes. You stroke your chin, wondering if any ancient physician submitted errata to Imhotep's original text. You spot a battered papyrus sherd displaying an early draft of the Kahun gynecological papyrus. Its cursive signs outline a bedsore recipe using poppy seed oil and honey, yet later copies replace poppy with sesame oil. Fringe writers suggest poppy-induced drowsiness helped restless patients sleep through dressings, while mainstream records credit sesame's stability in heat. Historians still argue whether the swap was pharmacological innovation or a response to shifting trade availability. Across the chamber, a group of scholars debates the proper translation of a single hieroglyph that determines whether a recipe calls for crushed insects or ground grains. The glyph in question, an ear of wheat sharing strokes with the scarab beetle, sparked fierce argument. One school insists it meant insect powder, aligning with ant-based antiseptics. Another insists grain-based abrasion was the intent. You stifle a grin your second joke. Turns out ambivalent beetles sparked centuries of confusion. The head scribe ushers you to a display of wooden writing palettes, each strewn with ink pots in black, red, and ochre pigments. He explains their coding system: black ink for primary recipes, red for cautions, ochre for variations. You dip a reed stylus into red ink and draw an ostentatious caution mark in the margin of a soothing-sounding honey recipe just for kicks, and imagine how modern editors would react to editorial doodles in medical manuals. You step toward a low bench where several staffers practice copying recipes by hand. One apprentice miswrites twice daily, has 22 daily a slip that, if unnoticed, could have prompted thrice hourly dressings. Historians still argue whether tragic mishaps like these spurred refinements in copying protocols or fueled temple gossip. You quietly quip, third joke. Imagine turning down dinner 8 times a day for bedsores. The chamber walls boast painted vignettes of deities presenting scrolls to mortal healers. A relief shows Thoth handing a papyrus to a kneeling physician, symbolizing divine endorsement of medical knowledge. Mainstream fact: Egyptians regarded medicine as a gift from the gods, blending empirical study with spiritual awe. Yet scholars debate whether these images reflect actual practice or idealized propaganda for temple-sponsored clinics. As you wander deeper, you overhear a heated dispute. One elder insists the great physician Horemheb added a secret incantation lost to time. Another retorts that no credible source attests to such a formula. Their voices rise, then dissolve into respectful bows. You sense that even in ancient times, the pursuit of medical truth invited passionate, ongoing discourse, much like today's conferences and symposiums. You examine a long scroll that chronicles changes in bedsore treatments across dynasties. The Old Kingdom favored honey-heavy pastes. The Middle Kingdom saw the rise of herbal infusions. The New Kingdom introduced mineral additives. Each era tweaked formulations according to available materials and royal preferences. Historians still argue whether these shifts reflect genuine improvements or simply changing tastes among the elite. The scribe offers you a reed and ink set and invites you to make your own annotation. You pause, thinking of the countless variations you've witnessed. Crocodile dung here, hippo tooth powder there, porpoise teeth in unexpected recipes, and sketch a stylized, annotated tree, linking each ingredient to its alleged benefit. You step back, imagining this crude diagram, inspiring debates centuries later. You rise from your stool feeling the weight of accumulated questioning and revision. Medicine, you realize, was never static in ancient Egypt. It thrived on meticulous record-keeping and spirited debate. As you step toward the chamber's entrance, a final scroll catches your eye, a recipe promising healing as swift as the Nile's current, though its precise mix remains tantalizingly vague. You exit into bright sunlight, scrolls rustling softly behind you. The medical texts may differ in detail, but their collective wisdom laid the groundwork for systematic healing. You carry with you an appreciation for scholarly rigor, whether in hieroglyphs or high-tech journals, knowing that debate fuels progress, one contested glyph at a time. You slip through a slit of cedar doors into a dimly lit inner chamber, hidden beneath the temple's grand facade, where only the initiated enter to witness temple clinic's secrets. You probably won't survive long, tiptoeing past incense burners without sneezing through your tunic. But hold your breath. This subterranean sanctuary reveals the ritual heart of bedsore treatment. The air glows amber from oil lamps, nestled in niches carved into the sandstone walls. Hieroglyphic inscriptions swirl overhead, recounting divine mandates for healing, sung by temple priests. Mainstream fact temples in cities like Karnak and Edfu housed medical clinics staffed by priest-physicians combining spiritual rites with practical remedies. You crouch beside a low altar, noting bowls of consecrated water rumored to be drawn from the Nile at dawn. An odd tidbit, some priests insisted, boosted a poultice's potency. Historians still argue whether the timing of water collection genuinely affected healing outcomes or served as ritual theater for devotees. A lanky priest in a linen kilt motions you forward, his fingertips stained ochre. He offers you a reed cup filled with barley water, sweetened with honey. You sip carefully. It tastes like a thin porridge, left out for a week, your first offhand joke of the section. Yet, the barley water held nutritional value for weakened patients, a mainstream practice noted in the Hearst Papyrus. You follow the priest down a short corridor into the heart of the clinic, a vaulted hall lined with stone benches, each bench draped in fine linen. Here, patients recline behind heavy curtains embroidered with sacred animals. A hush falls as you enter. This is the holy ward where secular pain met divine oversight. The priest gestures to a central dais topped with a silver brazier. He stirs a dark mixture of honey natron and crushed beetles. Yes, beetles, ground for their supposed antibacterial acid into a thick paste. Scholars debate whether beetle-derived carboxylic acids truly inhibited bacteria, or if this was merely an experimental flourish, but the vivid red hue made dressings look alive, boosting patient morale. You can't help quipping second joke, nothing like scarlet goo to lift your spirits. Nearby, a pair of temple attendants chant rhythmic hymns to Sekhmet, their voices melding with the brazier's hiss. With each chant, the paste bubbles gently releasing a faint tang of fermentation. The ritual continues. A goat hair brush applies the warm salve to a patient's ulcer, followed by a sequenced layering of linen papyrus strips, and finally a ribbon of blue lotus fiber believed to soothe inflammation. That blue lotus fiber once fetched higher prices than silver, mainstream evidence shows, and priests considered it sacred to Nefertem, god of healing blooms. You lean in to observe the wrap's final flourish, a thin line of ground turquoise dust sprinkled along the linen's edge. Quirky fact or cunning marketing, turquoise, mined in the Sinai, was said to channel protective energies. Historians still argue whether turquoise powder offered any antimicrobial benefit or merely signaled divine favor. You stifle a grin. Your third joke, turquoise bandage, because even your sore butt deserves sparkle. As the priest seals the wrap with a dab of beeswax, he intones the clinic's invocation, "May Thoth's wisdom guide these hands, and may Ra's warmth revive this flesh." The invocation rings off the stone vaults, lending gravity to the proceedings. You note the blend of empirical process, exact ingredient proportions recorded on papyrus, and ornate ceremony, incense, chanted hymns, and anointing oils of cedar and frankincense. Together, they form the holistic core of temple healing. Across the room, an elder priestess records patient progress on a wooden tablet, her stylus scratching in red and black ink. She documents not only wound size and dressing schedule, but emotional state, because in temple clinics, psyche and soma intertwined. Mainstream fact: Egyptians believed that emotional harmony influenced physical recovery, a viewpoint echoed in modern psychosomatic medicine. You consider that connection, imagining a modern hospital ward with daily group chanting, maybe not such a bad idea after all. You wander to a corner where potions steep in alabaster jars. One is the famed fish brine infusion made by soaking salted fish in water for days until it turned milky. It was then filtered through linen and mixed with honey for a salty, protein-rich dressing. Fringe lore claims fishermen's wives first used it on blistered feet after long nights mending nets, but scholars still argue whether fish brine remedies ever achieved mainstream acceptance or remained niche curiosities. You wrinkle your nose at the notion, fourth joke, opportunity missed, but you bite your tongue. Pausing by a low shelf, you finger a votive statuette of Sekhmet goddess of both plague and cure. Priests believed that invoking Sekhmet's dual nature could drive infection out of the body. They placed statuettes near bedsore sites, chanting protective spells. Modern archaeologists uncovered such statuettes in healing temples, confirming this mainstream ritual practice. Yet they debate whether patients genuinely felt relief from divine presence, or if placebo effect carried more weight than godly intervention. A soft chime echoes, signaling the next treatment cycle. Temple attendants glide into the ward carrying baskets of fine linen freshly washed in Nile water, scented with lotus blossoms. They unwrap old dressings, discarding them ceremonially into a brazier for fire purification. You can almost detect faint wisps of smoke-laced incense blending with burning linen, a sensory signature of renewal and cleanliness. The priest invites you to perform a simple duty ring, a small bronze bell, to mark the treatment's completion. You raise your hand and let it fall, producing a clear chime that resonates through the hush. It's oddly calming, a reminder that even in ancient sanctuaries, small rituals anchored the passage of time. As you prepare to depart, the chief priest drapes a final blessing over a newly wrapped patient, an ankh-shaped pendant dipped in honey and pressed to the dressing. The symbolism is potent ankh for life, honey for healing. This moment crystallizes the temple clinic's secret alchemy, where science, symbolism, and ceremony converged to mend flesh and spirit alike. You back away, slipping past the cedar doors into the sunlit courtyard once more. The temple's hidden sanctuary fades behind you, but its echoes linger, the hush of chants, the shimmer of honey, the promise of renewed life. You slip out of the temple's sanctum into a shaded vestibule lined with clay pots and papyrus bundles, where fringe remedies explored take center stage. You probably won't survive long sifting through these eccentric concoctions without questioning your taste buds. But brace yourself, tonight we delve into the oddball cures that Egyptian physicians experimented with, many of which historians still argue about to this day. A low bench holds jars labeled with cryptic hieroglyphs. One reads, beetle blood elixir, another, mummy powder paste, and a third, fish eye ointment. You reach for the beetle blood, hesitating as the apprentice cracks open a scarab's shell and squeezes a droplet of deep crimson liquid into a bowl of honey. Fringe sources suggest scarab hemolymph delivered natural antibacterial compounds, though mainstream evidence confirms only that Egyptians revered scarabs as symbols of rebirth. Historians still argue whether any true medicinal benefit lay in what remains a vividly poetic remedy. You quip your first joke. When life gives you scarabs, make scarab aid. Next to you, a stout jar bears ground mummy powder, literally powdered bits of embalmed remains. Yes, they ground mummies into medicine. According to medieval European copies of Egyptian pharmacopoeias, mummy powder was thought to staunch bleeding and heal ulcers. Modern forensic analysis, however, shows the main ingredient was bitumen and aromatic resins, not human tissue. Fringe tales insist Egyptians themselves used real human remains, but mainstream studies argue this was a later folk myth, a mix-up fueled by mistranslation and European morbidity. Historians still argue whether mummy powder ever saw authentic application in ancient clinics or remained a mythic import centuries later. You cover your nose and whisper, talk about a long-dead remedy. Your gaze drifts to the fish eye ointment, small glassy beads that look unnervingly like tiny marbles. A physician crushes a handful and mixes them into a poultice of clay and honey. Fringe whisperers claim fish eye beads, actually crystallized fish otoliths, contained calcium-rich material thought to fortify tissue repair. Mainstream fact, fish otoliths were known in antiquity but are rarely documented in Egyptian medical texts. Whether anyone ever applied these beads to wounds or simply misread natural pearls for medicinal use remains a lively puzzle. Historians still argue whether fish eye poultices ever cured more than fisherman's curiosity. You manage your second joke, fisheye paste, because why not stare down your ulcer? A battered amphora in the corner bears a faded label for ostrich eggshell powder. The powder is fine as talcum gathered from ceremonial eggshells and mixed with frankincense. Fringe proponents suggest ostrich eggshell harbored antimicrobial proteins, but modern science identifies no unique antiseptic compounds in eggshell. Mainstream records hint that eggshell powder served primarily as a desiccant to absorb moisture in dressings. Scholars still argue whether the ceremonial status of ostrich eggs elevated this remedy's perceived efficacy, or if any actual healing took place. You raise an eyebrow. Third joke. Ostrich shells good for dinner, not much for your sore butt. On a side table, a reed basket holds bundles of dried scorpion tails. A curious physician crushes one tail into dust, stirring it into a paste of honey and natron. Fringe myth claims scorpion venom in minute doses promoted circulation and stung pathogens. Mainstream toxicology, however, warns that scorpion venom is neurotoxic and unlikely to aid healing. Historians still argue whether isolated scorpion compounds ever entered legitimate medical practice or simply served as talismanic deterrents against evil. You flinch at the thought, scorpion paste, painful placebo, or just painful. Beyond these, you spot a small vial of dust of blue lotus ash, the residue from burned lotus blossoms. Fringe fans claim the ash carried sedative alkaloids to lull patients into restful comas, easing pain during dressing changes. Mainstream analysis reveals the ash contained no active narcotics. Any modern equivalent sedation came only from additional ingredients like opium poppy. Historians still argue whether Egyptians ever used blue lotus ash alone for its psychoactive reputation or conflated it with other sleep-inducing substances. You inhale the faint scent of incense and joke. Sleep tight. Just don't dream of pupae. A final jar holds cat hair tincture, a liquid mixture of macerated feline fur and oil. A fringe narrative suggests cat hair facilitated closure of skin pores and repelled insects. Mainstream veterinary studies, however, dismiss any insecticidal properties in domestic cat hair. Scholars still argue whether this remedy originated from feline reverence. Cats were sacred to Bastet and served symbolic more than therapeutic aims. You can't help smirking cat hair allergy booster and viral TikTok fad millennia early. Amid these eccentric jars, you notice a parchment scroll outlining prayer to Isis for mummy-infused balm. The ritual prescribes stirring mummy powder under a full moon while reciting hymns, an elaborate ceremony more suited to theater than therapy. Historians still argue whether such hymns accompanied actual medical treatments or belonged to funerary rites entirely. You quip your final joke, Moonlight Mummy, mix ancient Egypt's original glow up. Despite the bizarre ingredients, these Fringe remedies underscore a broader truth. Ancient Egyptians combined observation, trial and error, and cultural beliefs to address afflictions. Mainstream medical texts emphasize honey natron and resin, yet fringe recipes reveal the daring breadth of experimentation. Even today, some alternative healers cite these ancient marvels, though modern evidence rarely confirms their efficacy. You step back, wiping a bead of sweat from your brow. The jars clang softly as the vestibule's silence returns. You carry with you an appreciation for the curious creativity and occasional madness of ancient medical practice, knowing that, fringe or fact, every attempt at healing shaped the path of human understanding. You slip from the curious vestibule into a sunlit courtyard where daily life disruptions take center stage, because bedsore care didn't happen in isolation, but wove into routines of nobles and laborers alike. You probably won't survive long pretending to be a casual observer here without tripping over a reed basket or startling a goat. But settle in. This is where you see how ulcers altered everyday rhythms. A merchant's wife, once brisk and cheerful, now moves at a measured pace. The courtyard's flagstones cluster beneath her sandals, each step balanced to avoid pressure on her recovering hip. You watch her pause by a low stone bench to adjust fresh linen bandages, then continue to exchange greetings with neighbors. Mainstream fact: Egyptians valued social rituals like daily market visits and temple offerings. Even minor mobility issues forced individuals to adapt schedules and social roles. Historians still argue whether social support networks eased convalescence, or if fear of stigma sometimes isolated the afflicted. Nearby, a group of children chase a stray ball of palm leaf fiber. They veer around a reclining scribe who's paused his morning scroll copying to rest his heels. He leans on a cushion, wincing as the children laugh and shriek your first light joke of the section. Yet their play underscores a poignant truth. While ulcers slowed, some life's river flowed on. At a shaded alcove, a seamstress halts her weaving. She sets aside linen threads and approaches a neighbor to trade labor. She'll mend a garment today in exchange for helping her replace bedding. Barter and mutual aid formed the backbone of community care mainstream practice, documented in village council records from Deir el-Medina. Historians still argue whether formal guilds facilitated these exchanges or if they remained informal arrangements among families. Across the way, an elder potter instructs apprentices to install a simple sling on a workshop bench, ensuring customers with footbed sores can sit comfortably while ordering wares. You stifle a grin. Second joke: Bedsores giving pottery classes a new VIP seating option. Yet the adaptation reveals ingenuity. Egyptians designed everyday furniture to accommodate the ailing, a proto-ergonomic mindset modern designers would envy. A water carrier ducks beneath low vines, carrying twin jugs balanced on a yoke. He pauses at a patient's door to deliver cool water and fresh bandages. Door-to-door care blurred lines between professional physicians and community helpers. Mainstream evidence shows that non-medical volunteers played crucial roles in dressing changes, especially during festival seasons when clinics overflowed. Historians still argue whether organized volunteer groups existed or if helpers acted spontaneously based on kinship ties. The merchant's wife returns, clutching a woven basket of dates and figs, nutrient-rich snacks prescribed by healers to boost patient strength. She stoops to place them on a low table, mindful not to jostle her hip. Mainstream medical texts recommended dietary support alongside topical treatments. Healing, they believed, arose from both inside and out. Historians still argue whether nutritional guidelines came from temple decrees or evolved through folk wisdom. As midday sun warms the courtyard stones, a traveling musician arrives with a short lyre. He offers a gentle melody, his fingers coaxing soft chords to ease the patient's mind. Music and storytelling, mainstream cultural therapies recorded in papyri, aimed to distract from pain and foster calm. Historians still debate the extent of music therapy in Egypt, but evidence of lyre depictions in clinics suggests it played a soothing role. You quip your third joke. Finally, an importable playlist for Bedsores therapy tracks. Farmer 1. You wander toward a communal water trough, where a patient rinses old bandages, preparing them for ritual cleansing. She hums a hymn to Thoth, her voice steady despite discomfort. Shared chores like this built camaraderie, a communal rhythm, weaving healing into daily life. Mainstream accounts from temple annals mention group dressing change festivals, ritualized renewals, tying personal recovery to communal health. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were common or rare ceremonial exceptions. Nearby, a sandlark flits across the courtyard, pecking at spilled grain. Its carefree dance contrasts with the careful, deliberate steps of the injured. You watch, both reminded that pain reshapes ordinary actions, walking, sitting, socializing, yet life's tapestry remains vivid and active. As you prepare to leave this mosaic of adaptation, you note the courtyard's tapestry of resilience, modified benches, supportive neighbors, shared rituals, musical interludes, and timely nourishment. Bedsores disrupted routines, but communities responded with creativity and empathy, ensuring that healing wove seamlessly into the fabric of daily life along the Nile. You slip onto a creaking river barge laden with amphora spices and medicinal tonics, setting out to trace trade routes and remedies as they flowed across the ancient world. You probably won't survive long aboard without learning to dodge swinging ropes and nosy merchants, but grip the rail. This voyage reveals how honey-based treatments spread from Egypt to far-flung shores. The barge drifts beneath towering palm groves, the Nile's current guiding you past fields where bees buzz among clover and wild thyme. An Egyptian trader leans over the railing, sampling a chunk of desiccated date bread, rubbed with honey, a quick snack, and a shout-out to portable medicine. Mainstream fact: Greek physicians like Hippocrates wrote glowingly of Egyptian honey's healing powers as early as the 5th century BCE, citing imported jars in their own pharmacopoeias. Historians still argue whether Greeks fully grasped honey's osmotic effects or simply romanticized its exotic origin. But the jars sailed regularly along these waters. A Nubian merchant approaches presenting a scroll of frankincense trade agreements. He haggles over quantities, knowing that frankincense's antiseptic resin mixed with Egyptian honey boosted poultice strength. Fringe gossip has it that some caravans carried jars labeled crocodile dung infusion to entice bold buyers, though mainstream records focus on frankincense, myrrh, and resin-savvy blends. Scholars debate whether the crocodile dung label was serious commerce or clever marketing banter to impress visiting dignitaries. You quip your first joke. Nothing says luxury medicine like a hint of swamp byproduct. You wander below deck, where clay jars of natron lotus pollen and ground sesame seeds hang from poles to keep rodents out. A Greek sailor inspects natron, nodding at its familiar feel. His homeland's salt springs produced a variant used in Hellenistic clinics. Mainstream fact: Roman field medics adopted natron-packed bandages for soldiers' wounds during campaigns, testament to Egypt's early influence. Historians still argue whether Egyptian natron was chemically distinct from Mediterranean sources, or if branding as Egyptian natron simply carried cachet. Above deck, a Phoenician trader breaks out sesame oil from jars stamped with Egyptian hieroglyphs. He demonstrates mixing it with honey to create a smooth emollient. According to fringe legend preserved in a Syrian codex, a Phoenician queen once healed royal bedsores with this blend after a long sea voyage. Modern scholars question the codex's dating or authenticity, yet sesame honey salves did appear in Near Eastern medical texts, mainstream evidence that knowledge traversed borders via shattered amphorae and casual conversation. A Greek physician aboard scribbles notes on a wax tablet, pausing to drop a few myrrh beads into his poultice. He traces the recipe's lineage from temple clinics in Thebes to scholar priests in Athens, and now to busy port cities like Tyre and Alexandria. You lean in, catching the sharp scent of fermented date wine used to sterilize the mixing vessels. That detail sparks scholarly debate. Did date wine rinses genuinely reduce infection risk, or were they simply a convenient byproduct of onboard provisions? Historians still argue whether wine served chiefly as antiseptic or as sacramental libation to secure divine blessing for the journey. You climb the ladder to the crow's nest, where you scan the horizon for trading posts at Elephantine, Aswan, and beyond. Each stop delivered fresh ingredients: senna leaves from Nubia, cedar oil from Lebanon, and ostrich eggshell powder from Punt. Fringe myths claim that Punt shamans blessed each batch of honey with protective chants, but mainstream accounts credit Punt primarily for incense and ebony. Whether sacred rites imbued remedies with extra potency remains a topic of spirited academic debate. Below the ship's medic treats a deckhand's bruised shoulder with a honey aloe gel wrapped in jam jay fabrics, a local palm fiber textile. This improvisation underscores how sailors blended Egyptian protocols with native materials wherever they landed. Mainstream evidence, maritime medical manuals from Roman times, mention Egyptian belly bandages reused for deck injuries, showing the long voyage of Egyptian bedsores treatments beyond riverbanks. A brisk wind picks up and the trader secures amphorae with ropes woven from papyrus cord, recalling the cord's earlier use as sling ties in bedsore care. You quip your second joke, papyrus cord supporting shoulders and shipping jars alike. The ingenuity of repurposing materials resonates across contexts from royal clinics to crowded holds. As dusk falls, the barge docks at Aswan's sandstone quarries. Here, a small bazaar bustles with camel caravans exchanging spices and remedies. Merchants load camels with honey-charged poultices, bound for caravanserais, stretching to Persia and beyond. Fringe anecdotes whisper of Persian kings requesting beekeeper delegates to verify honey's authenticity, a ritual some scholars dismiss as fanciful. Historians still argue whether such delegations existed or if the tale emerged much later among storytellers. You stroll through lantern-lit stalls, pausing at a Persian apothecary's counter. He points to a clay tablet inscribed with Egyptian bed scar formula written in Aramaic script. The formula lists honey natron and tree resins, very much echoing what you've seen back home. The apothecary tastes a drop of honey nods appreciatively, then sprinkles a pinch of powdered juniper nut atop it, adding a local twist. This cross-pollination of ideas exemplifies trade routes and remedies working in tandem. The caravan traders erect tents for overnight sleep, careful to bring padded mats to prevent new bed sores after long travel days. You nod, imagining these travelers drawing on Egyptian wisdom to cushion weary backs. Mainstream texts from Buddhist monasteries centuries later recommend similar bedding evidence of knowledge's slow but steady march across continents. Historians still argue whether this was direct transmission or parallel innovation spurred by shared human needs. As you prepare to reboard the barge, you pocket a small vial of frankincense-infused honey purchased from the bazaar. You savor its spicy aroma, a souvenir of a journey that wove Egypt's healing secrets into a tapestry of global exchange. You quip your third joke, from Nile to Silk Road. Your bedsore kit just got an upgrade. You step onto the barge's deck as lanterns flicker to life, the Nile's water reflecting dancing lights like scattered stars. The trade routes carried not just goods, but living traditions of care, standing testament to how human ingenuity, curiosity, and a dollop of honey bridged cultures and healed bodies across the ancient world. You slip back onto solid ground at a bustling Nile Delta town where decline and legacy take center stage, chronicling the ebb of Egyptian methods as Greek and Roman medicine rise. You probably won't survive long ignoring the clatter of Greek scholars debating humors in the shadow of ancient tombs. But steady yourself, this chapter charts how honey-based bedsore care waned in prestige, yet left an enduring imprint. A peristyle courtyard echoes with the clipped tones of Hellenistic physicians. Here, Hippocratic practitioners examine patients using rigid doctrine of blood phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Mainstream fact: by the 3rd century BCE, Greek medical schools in Alexandria had incorporated select Egyptian remedies, most notably honey poultices, into their own treatises, as seen in fragments of the Hippocratic corpus. Historians still argue whether this integration represented genuine syncretism or simply literary appropriation, a scholarly tug-of-war played out across papyrus margins. You wander into a portico lined with marble statues. Isis cradles Horus in one alcove. Asclepius holds his serpent rod in another. Physicians here debate whether Egyptian unguents carried mystical power or mere placebo effect. Fringe tales credit Cleopatra herself with commissioning royal honey for Roman generals' bedsores, but mainstream sources suggest that by then, Egyptian clinics had already lost monopoly on medical prestige. Scholars still argue whether Cleopatra's regimens leaned more toward spectacle or genuine efficacy, a debate that flavors both history and Hollywood. Nearby, a Greek student pores over a scroll excerpted from the Edwin Smith papyrus, copying honey resin recipes in neat Ionic script. He pauses, tapping his stylus against his chin, pondering the mixture of logic and ritual. You offer a light joke. When in doubt, scribble it in both languages. Yet, the shadow of change looms. Alexandria's great library buzzed with scribes classifying remedies under rational categories, phasing out temple rituals in favor of empirical observation. A wandering healer dressed in Roman garb sets up a maceration station by a spice vendor's stall. He mixes imported myrrh and frankincense with local grape must-ignoring honey, except for a token drizzle. Mainstream fact: Galen's writings in the 2nd century CE criticized excessive reliance on animal-derived humors and championed botanical extracts, though he still mentioned honey's mild antiseptic qualities. Historians still argue whether Galen's selective citations sidelined Egyptian methods to promote Greek botanical supremacy, or reflected genuine pharmacological innovation. You slip through a columned courtyard to find an aging Egyptian physician teaching apprentices under a faded mural of Anubis. He demonstrates an oil-heated balm combining sesame oil and natron with leftover honey. An apprentice whispers that such techniques survived in rural villages long after urban clinics abandoned them. Fringe anthropologists suggest these folk practices persisted well into medieval Coptic communities, but mainstream evidence for post-Roman continuity remains sparse. Scholars still debate whether Bedsores treatments truly endured in village lore or vanished as Christianized medicine took hold. Beyond the mural, a goat-shaped fountain spills clear water, symbolizing life's renewal. You dip a finger, tasting the cool liquid, before rinsing away sticky residue on your palm. You quip your second joke. When in doubt, drink the fountain. Just don't blame me for indigestion. Yet the force of tradition persists even later. Greek writers like Dioscorides acknowledged that Egyptian honey-natron mixtures relieved athletes' wounds, citing performances at early Olympic Games. Mainstream fact that testifies to cross-cultural respect for the remedy's practicality. You follow a procession of patients from a Roman military camp, some on crutches, others borne on litters, each bearing fresh honey-soaked flax bandages. The camp's medic, wearing a bronze helmet, applies the dressing with clinical detachment. Soldiers speak of the poultice's soothing effect, a simple salve amid brutal campaigns. Fringe military records mention Egyptian scar formula stamped on clay tablets in Dura Europos, but mainstream archaeology has yet to confirm such labels. Historians still argue whether Roman legions systematically adopted Egyptian dressings or picked them up ad hoc from local healers. A temple-turned-clinic in Philae houses a small shrine to Isis and Serapis, where priests administer treatments in daylight's filtered glow. Here, the last vestiges of temple healing persist as priests chant hymns before applying honey regimens. You note that by the late Roman era, temple medicine coexisted uneasily with imperial hospitals backed by state funding, mainstream fact, illustrating the pluralism of late antique healthcare. Scholars still debate whether temple clinics lingered as philanthropic outposts or dwindled into quaint relics of a bygone age. You ascend stone steps leading to a small theater courtyard where a philosopher-doctor lectures on the mechanics of tissue repair. He extols the virtues of bloodletting and cupping, but concedes that in stubborn cases, honey-natron combos still merit a try. An audience of curious onlookers murmurs approval. Your third joke, bloodletting, might make you lightheaded, but honey keeps you sweet. Even as new methods took center stage, the old ways refused to vanish entirely. At the base of the theater, travelers vend small jars stamped with a Coptic cross that once bore an ankh, an emblem of continuity and transformation. The jars carry honey-infused salves marketed to pilgrims on their way to holy sites. Fringe legends credit Coptic monks with secretly preserving Egyptian recipes in monastic scripts. Yet mainstream scholarship finds scant direct references. Historians still argue whether monastic medicine formed a bridge between ancient and medieval practices, or if the Coptic Church deliberately distanced itself from pagan lore. As twilight settles, You trace your path along the quay, illuminated by oil lamps and starlight. Fishermen unload nets, heavy with catfish and eels, while healers collect carrion for fish brine infusions. Despite the ascendancy of Greek and Roman theories, Egypt's foundational contributions continued to ripple outward, carried by travelers, merchants, and scribes who revered honey's gentle power. You pause on the stone embankment, watching the river's dark ribbon flow toward the Mediterranean. The methods of bedsores, once inseparable from Nile-tuned rituals, have dwindled in formal practice, yet left a legacy woven into Mediterranean medicine. From pharaonic clinics to Byzantine infirmaries, the sticky wisdom of Egyptian healers endured a testament to human ingenuity in the face of mortal fragility. Word count 1010. Awaiting continue. Section 15. You slip into a twilight-lit chamber carved into the soft limestone cliffs overlooking the Nile, where the fading drip of honey signals our final dance with ancient Egyptian healing. You probably won't survive long, lingering in this hushed retreat without succumbing to nostalgia. But lean in here. We prepare the final whisper of healing as night's hush settles. A low stone bench curves around a small fire pit where herbs smolder gently. The air carries the mingled scents of honey lotus and frankincense, notes of the entire journey distilled into a single breath. Mainstream fact: Egyptians believed that twilight represented a sacred threshold between life and death, making it an auspicious time for medical rituals aimed at transformation and regeneration. Historians still argue whether treatments timed at dusk offered genuine physiological benefits or existed primarily in spiritual tradition. You pause before a small niche housing a shallow alabaster basin. It holds the final batch of honey natron salve, its surface gleaming like liquid gold kissed by torchlight. An elderly healer dips her fingertips into the mixture, then allows a single deliberate drop to fall slow and rhythmic onto a fresh piece of linen. That drop lands with a soft plop, a momentary echo of the life it carries. You offer your first light joke, one drop closer to sweet dreams. Nearby assistants carry bundles of linen strips woven with lotus fibers. They dip each strip into the salve, then fan them gently to let excess moisture evaporate in the cool night air. The strips unroll across a wooden table in neat rows, resembling golden reeds lined up to greet dawn. Fringe lore suggests that salves cured even midnight chills, but mainstream sources focus on their gentle antiseptic action, underscoring the blend of myth and medicine that defined Egyptian practice. As you settle onto a cushioned mat, a slow chant begins, an invocation to Hathor, goddess of joy and the afterlife. The chant pulses softly, guiding a rhythmic tapping of lotus-infused poultices against the patient's weary limbs. You sense a soothing lull, honey's sweetness, lotus's cool touch, and the chant's gentle cadence weaving together to cradle the body and mind. As the dressing cycle concludes, the chief healer offers a whispered benediction. May sleep embrace you like papyrus on water. May your wounds heal under Ra's silent watch. You lean back, letting the words wash over you. In this moment, the boundary between healer and healed, between myth and medicine, blurs into harmony. You rise, feeling the culmination of centuries of practice palpitate in every breath. The basin's final traces of salve swirl as assistants wash it away with cooled river water, an act symbolizing both completion and continuity. Mainstream fact: ritual cleansing after medical acts signified purification of body and soul, a principle echoed in modern surgical scrubs. Historians still argue whether such rituals aimed to curb infection or simply reaffirmed communal bonds through shared ceremony. Beyond the chamber, the Nile's gentle murmur greets the sleeping town. Lanterns glow like fireflies along the water's edge, inviting weary travelers to rest. You taste the night air, soft, cool, and tinged with distant papyrus fragrances. That's your second light joke. Even the Nile's whisper sounds like a bedtime story. As you prepare to depart this sacred space, a final petal floats down from the lotus-woven canopy above, blown by an unseen breeze. You catch it before it lands, cradling it in your palm like a silent vow. The legacy of Egyptian healers will endure in every drop of honey, every soothing chant, and every whispered prayer across the ages. You step into the night, retracing your path past carved reliefs of gods and healers entwined, feeling the weight of history softened by honey's gentle embrace. Let your eyelids grow as heavy as papyrus scrolls, closing for the last time. Feel the warmth of honey's legacy softening every edge of your mind, each memory of poultices and chants drifting away like petals on a gentle current. In the hush of night, imagine the Nile's slow flow carrying away your worries, its waters cool beneath a blanket of moonlight. The chants of Hathor fade into distant echoes, leaving only the soft heartbeat of temple silence. Breathe in the subtle sweetness of lotus and frankincense, exhaling every trace of tension lodged in your shoulders and spine. Let each breath remind you of the healing rituals under torchlit halls and sun-baked courtyards now dissolved into a placid calm. Picture honey drops slipping from your fingers, each one a promise of renewal, reminding you that even the most stubborn wounds can mend in time. Feel the linen's soft embrace of twilight weaving through your thoughts, its texture gentler than any bandage. Recall the final drip into the alabaster basin, a single moment, distilled from millennia of wisdom, now guiding you toward rest. As that last drop settled into stillness, so too shall your mind settle into peaceful slumber. Trust in the embrace of ancient rituals and modern rest alike. Let the soft hum of the fan or the night's gentle breeze carry you into a dreamscape where healing continues in hushed landscapes of honeyed light. Sleep well, knowing that each breath is a balm, each moment a quiet remission of cares. Sweet dreams.